Hi, it's Christine with Moonshine Safari, and we are back to Outlander, the very first book, which is actually Outlander, Chapter 4. And as a reminder, we are doing spoilers for the show sometimes and the book, so if you haven't read them, you might want to stop. Just as a reminder, after Claire comes through the stones, she comes to in the middle of a Scot-English battle. The group of Scots has come to Castle Leoch. My pronunciation is terrible. I keep saying it, but I don't want anyone to think that I don't know. So here's where she's becoming more acquainted with Dougal's family, which is the Mackenzies. Remember Roger, the young boy from the vicarage in 1945? Name drop. Anyway, Claire remembers seeing the castle as a picturesque ruin in her time. But as of now, it's busy, it's bustling, it's moving. There are animals and gates and people everywhere and smells and everything that you would not see in a ruin. As they enter the courtyard, Dougal tells a young man that Mrs. Fitz will need to come and help the group get somewhere to get settled. In the meantime, he's got to go see his brother. That's a plot line that becomes very important. And so Claire is just sort of standing there waiting by the horse with Jamie when Mrs. Fitz arrives. And she's somewhat surprised to see Claire because Claire kind of stands out as a shock because of how she's dressed. Everybody thinks she's in her shift, which in my mind is like a slip. And so she's not dressed properly, and she's cold, and I'm sure she looks somewhat like a mess. So she's very nice, though, and Jamie introduces them, and Jamie starts to leave to go find himself some home comfort and some sleep, and Claire tells Mrs. Fitz, no, he was injured. He still needs help. I need to work on making sure the wound is dressed, etc. So Mrs. Fitzgibbons, or Mrs. Fitz for short, she seems surprised, but she kicks in to help Claire. And it turns out that she is very accomplished in her own right as far as the healing goes. So Claire is with Jamie, and she's escorted to a nice, comfortable room with a warm fire that she's thrilled about since she's been probably frozen to the saddle lately. And they sit Jamie down, and Mrs. Fitz helps Claire get ready to treat him. Claire's going through her brain to think about what needs to be done for the healing. So she asks Mrs. Fitz if she can help with some garlic and things like that to sort of disinfect the wound in the way that they used to herbally. And also Mrs. Fitz gives some kind of pointers to Claire, which Claire drinks in because obviously this method of healing is not her forte. This is not how she learned. And so after getting her started, Claire lets Mrs. Fitz know that she can handle it from here. And Mrs. Fitz, who is appearing to run the entire castle and the whole area, excuses herself and lets Claire know, look, if you need help, let me know. So Jamie's exhausted, and Claire is remembering some of the botany tips, etc. She's cleaning him, she's cleaning the wound, she's dressing it, and she's talking to him at the same time because sort of to distract him from the fact that it probably hurts. I mean, it talks about the strips of cloth being sort of dried to his wounds, which kind of actually physically hurts me just to hear. So once Jamie's shirt is totally off, wink, right? And Claire has some light, she's actually able to see that his back is entirely scarred up. And this becomes important long term. It's clear that he has been badly whipped. And he mentions that the man who whipped him is none other than Black Jack Randall. Here's that name again. She's already met the guy. It's just not a good situation. And she's shocked, and it's hard for her to imagine since her husband is a nice, peaceful man, according to her. But it doesn't make sense to her. But anyway, so as they're talking, Jamie's tired and is kind of spacing out a little bit, and one of those things where you're kind of talking and you're just sort of, it's almost monotonous and droning on. You're just kind of spacing out while you're talking. And she notices that even now, even with the beating he's taken, he looks pretty tough. And he's telling the story of how, while his father was gone, basically the whipping happened. And the English, led by Blackjack, came to his home, and there was a fight. And they were assaulting his sister, and he was threatened. Blackjack was with them and actually leading them. And Jamie was trying to protect her. His sister's name is Jenny. And he actually was doing pretty well fighting the English that he was fighting. But then Blackjack got a hold of his sister and threatened the sister, and Jamie complied. And at that point, he was knocked out. He was taken prisoner. And Jenny stopped fighting the English as well to keep them from outright killing Jamie. So it comes out that he was flogged twice. He was given 100 lashes, and then apparently they would have given him more, but it would have killed him that day then. And so the doctor stepped in and would not allow them to continue flogging him at that point. So after her talk with Jamie, it suddenly hits Claire how jacked up the situation is. It kind of crashes in all at once on her about everything that's happened, because it really, in a sense, she's been in shock. She's come through the stones. She's in a different time. None of this makes sense in her brain. And she's talking to these people that clearly lived 200 years before she did. And it's just bizarre. And so she's wondering in her mind, Frank, what about home? What about the stones? And she starts to cry. She kind of is blabbering a little bit. She mentions something about her husband. And so Jamie goes, oh, so you're a widow. And she kind of says, well, yeah, well, no, but yeah. I mean, there's no good way to explain that Frank is not dead, but he's 200 years from now. So it's a similar answer, really. He comforts her, and it's physically obvious that he kind of likes her a little bit. So obviously she notices this. She recovers herself, and he lets her know that he's not embarrassed. He just basically says, look, he would never hurt her, and she should know that he would never hurt her, and not to be afraid of him and not to be afraid of anybody else when he's with her. So they kind of have a moment. He tells her, look, get something to eat. It's going to make you feel better. And she does have a little bit of broth, and she collapses in the bed, and that's it. And that is where chapter 4 kind of ends. You are solidly in episode 2 at this point. A lot happens in episode 2 on the show, so that's going to take a few chapters. But right now you're in the middle of episode 2. So as far as insights go, what I find interesting about this is right now we're kind of in the middle still of all of the setup. It takes a while to set everything up. We have names that need to make it into the consciousness. We have a lot of things. We see that Jamie is protective right off the bat. He's telling Claire, look, don't be afraid of anybody when you're with me. I'm not going to hurt you. He has also essentially offered to sacrifice himself. When it came to his sister, he tells the story about what was happening with the English and his sister. His sister also seems to have a little bit of that. They're in the same family, and so she offers to go with the English in order to save him as well. So they're mutually protective. Jamie also has a good sense of humor. He makes a couple of jokes even after he's been in so much pain for so long. And Claire is still, we don't know a whole lot about her personality yet, other than she's got a mouth that surprises them for the time period that she's in. And she's pretty strong-willed, but she's kind of been reeling. So we haven't seen a ton of her personality come out yet. I think that's going to come. And for the most part, a lot of the Scots are pretty welcoming, although they are intimidating as well. So we're still learning about a lot of the people. And so as far as insights go, these are the parts that I am finding interesting. We have some really cool Outlander themed merchandise on moonshinesafari.com, and I'd love for you to check it out. And otherwise, also check out the first 3 chapters if you've missed any, and let's see where it goes from here. See you soon.